Israel's destructive policies are incompatible with the international community's quest for peace and stability.
Here in this Council, some members chose to give Hamas legitimacy, even protection. Israel will not. We will act against the leaders of terror wherever they are hiding. They are treated like celebrities. And when bin Laden was eliminated in Pakistan, the question asked was not, why target a terrorist on foreign soil? No one asked that question. The question was, why was a terrorist given shelter at all? The same question must be asked today. There was no immunity for bin Laden, and there can be no immunity for Hamas.
Israel also chose to refer to an unrelated incident and make misleading remarks regarding Pakistan.
So I ask, if these actions were justified then, why is Israel singled out now? Why are claims concerning sovereignty invoked only against Israel?
The international community is well aware of Pakistan's frontline role and sacrifices in the international community's fight against terrorism.
Maybe you got offended from the word of my speech, but I make sure that in my speech I stick to the facts. And the fact is that Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan.
The U.S. killed bin Laden in Pakistan.
I have a point of order. The delegation of Pakistan.
We urge you to ensure that no speaker violates the principles and purposes of the UN Charter.
I give the floor back to United Nations Watch for 4 seconds.
Pakistan is another state sponsor of terror.
We need no lessons from a terror sponsor, no sermons from a persecutor of minorities, no advice from a state that has squandered its own credibility.
And I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for convening this urgent meeting at the request of Algeria, Pakistan, and Somalia, and supported by other Council members. We also thank Under Secretary General De Carlo for her briefing. We welcome the presence of His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani, the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar. We also welcome the participation of the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Jordan, the representatives of UAE, Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait, and Egypt to this meeting. Pakistan condemns in the strongest possible terms the illegal and unprovoked Israeli aggression against the brotherly state of Qatar. This reckless and provocative attack constitutes a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar, contrary to the fundamental principles of international law, including the UN Charter, in particular its Article 2.4, prohibiting the threat or use of force. As the Prime Minister of Pakistan has stated, this act of aggression by Israel is totally unjustified and constitutes a most dangerous provocation that could imperil regional peace and stability. The Israeli strikes targeted a residential neighborhood, deliberately endangering civilians, and thus also constitute a grave breach of international humanitarian law. This brazen and illegal assault is not an isolated incident. Rather, it is part of a broader and consistent pattern of aggression and violation of international law by Israel that undermines regional peace and stability. Pakistan expresses its complete solidarity with the government and people of Qatar and fully supports their inalienable right to take all necessary measures in accordance with the UN Charter to defend their sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the safety of all persons within their territory. In a gesture of solidarity and regional unity, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, His Excellency Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif, accompanied by a high-level delegation, including the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, is visiting Qatar today. The visit underscores Pakistan's unwavering support for the security and sovereignty of Qatar and its commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. Mr. President, this irresponsible action by Israel is yet another manifestation of its systematic disregard for international law and its brazen policy of destabilizing the region. It adds to its long and dubious record of aggression, brutal military actions in Gaza, repeated cross-border strikes in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and Yemen, all of which amount to violations of the UN Charter and international humanitarian law. Such acts of aggression, as defined by UN General Assembly Resolution 3314, also set a dangerous precedent, erode the primacy of rule of law, and breed a culture of impunity that threatens the security of all states. In view of the gravity of the situation, an extraordinary Arab-Islamic summit will take place in Doha on 15 September, with a view to ensuring a united response to Israel's aggression and to reaffirm the primacy of international law and the UN Charter. Pakistan will participate in this important meeting at the high level. Mr. President, at a time when delicate negotiations on Gaza peace deal were progressing towards a possible breakthrough, striking the territory of a principal mediator and those directly involved in negotiations is a deliberate attempt to sabotage diplomacy, derail peace efforts, and prolong the suffering of civilians. It is evident that Israel, the occupying power, is bent on doing everything to undermine and blow up every possibility of peace. It also raises serious questions whether the return of hostages was indeed a priority. Clearly, Israel's destructive policies are incompatible with the international community's quest for peace and stability. Sadly, it has been emboldened by the weak response and inaction by this Council. Pakistan commends Qatar's important and constructive role in facilitating mediation efforts, including for a ceasefire and release of hostages, which has been widely and consistently appreciated by all Council members, together with the role of Egypt and the United States. We recognize Qatar's tireless and principled engagement with all parties, often under most challenging circumstances, to keep the channels of dialogue open and advance prospects of peace. Qatar has consistently demonstrated leadership, wisdom, and commitment to humanitarian principles, working in close coordination with regional and international partners to bridge divides, promote peace, reduce tensions, and alleviate the plight of the Palestinian people. Undermining such a credible and indispensable mediator threatens to extinguish one of the few viable pathways towards a just and lasting peace. Targeting Qatar is thus not only an attack on a sovereign state, but also an attack on diplomacy and mediation itself. Pakistan welcomes the Security Council's condemnation of the strikes in Doha and expression of support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar in line with the principles of the UN Charter. The Council must go beyond, must hold Israel accountable, safeguard the role and protection of mediators engaged in peace efforts, and recommit to the centrality of international law and the UN Charter in maintaining international peace and security. Mr. President, the root cause of recurring crises and instability in the Middle East is Israel's prolonged occupation of Arab lands and its persistent defiance of international law and international legitimacy. Durable peace can only be achieved through a comprehensive political settlement, including an end to the occupation of Arab lands, particularly the occupied Palestinian territories. Pakistan calls for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire across Gaza and all occupied Palestinian territories. Full and unimpeded humanitarian access to the besieged and starved Palestinian population, and reinvigoration of a genuine and irreversible political process to end the Israeli occupation, leading to the realization of a sovereign, viable, and contiguous Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Pakistan stands shoulder to shoulder with the leadership and the brotherly people of Qatar in defense of their sovereignty, dignity, and territorial integrity. We remain steadfast in our commitment to uphold the principles of international law and the UN Charter, and to work with the international community to secure lasting peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. President, on September 9th, Israel carried out a precise and targeted strike in Doha. The strike targeted Hamas leaders who for years have planned and directed attacks against Israel, many times making these directives from the luxury confines in Doha. These terrorists were the sole target of the operation. The men targeted were not legitimate politicians, diplomats, or representatives. They were the masterminds of terror. They orchestrated the massacre on October 7th, murdering civilians, kidnapping children, raping women, wiping out entire communities. As the smoke still rose from the massacre, even as the attack was still unfolding, Hamas leaders in Qatar appeared live on television, proudly broadcasting their celebration. While Israelis hid in safe rooms, fled from gunfire, and endured murder, kidnapping, and rape, Hamas's leaders feasted and congratulated themselves in real time. These are the same men who called for jihad to escalate the conflict. They called for blood, not peace. They wild terror, not negotiation. And the terror has not stopped. Just days ago, at Ramot Junction in Jerusalem, Hamas terrorists opened fire on a bus stop crowded with children and adults. 6 innocent people were murdered. Among them, a 25-year-old who had immigrated from Spain, recently married and building his future in Israel. A rabbi who had dedicated his life to teaching the next generation. 2 residents of the community struck down in their own neighborhood. Among the wounded was a woman 8 months pregnant, left to fight for her life and the life of her unborn child. These are not numbers. They are lives, families, futures stolen. When the gunfire stopped, the bus and the pavement around it were drenched in blood. This is what terrorism looks like. Mothers clutching babies, a bus stop turned into a battlefield, a community scared in seconds. This is a reality we face in Israel. Terror raising its ugly head almost every single day. And let this council be reminded, there can be no immunity for terrorists. Hamas immediately praised the killers as heroic and exceptional, later claiming full responsibility for the attack and calling the massacre of innocent people a natural response. There is nothing natural about this. It is terror, pure and simple. Today, 48 innocent people are still held hostage by Hamas. Their families live in daily pain. It has been more than 700 days that innocent people have been trapped in Hamas captivity. 700 days of cruelty and abuse. Hamas has used them as bargaining chips, turning their suffering into currency. But let me be clear, there is no immunity for terrorists, not for those who commit it and not for those who enable it. Israel has agreed to President Trump's ceasefire proposal. We are ready to stop the fighting, but Hamas refuses. They keep the world waiting. They are in no rush. They have the time. Indifferent to the human suffering that their delay causes. And who suffers from this refusal? Not the leaders of Hamas, living abroad in the Ritz-Carlton in Doha. They don't suffer, they have the time. But the hostages languishing in their cells and the people of Gaza used as human shields. From the start, Hamas's strategy has been to embed its weapons among civilians. They hide rockets in schools, command centers in hospitals, and tunnels under homes. They put their own people in harm's way, then cry crocodile tears when civilians are hurt. Our fight is with Hamas, not with the people of Gaza, not with the state of Qatar. Israel will continue to take precautions to protect innocent lives. That is the difference between us and those who glorify massacre and terror. Like in the Bible, like Cain in the Bible, who was marked for the murder of his brother, so too are Hamas's leaders marked for their crimes. It doesn't matter where they hide, whether in the tunnel in Gaza or in a luxury hotel abroad. The mark of Cain is upon them. For too long, Hamas leaders have been sheltered not only in Doha, but in Beirut, Tehran, and elsewhere, parading as politicians and statesmen while acting as terrorists. They are treated like celebrities, when in reality, they are commanders of massacre and barbarism. This false disguise of legitimacy gave them freedom to move, to buy weapons, to recruit through so-called humanitarian networks, and to spread propaganda on international platforms that should have rejected them. This strike sends a message that should echo across this chamber. There is no sanctuary for terrorists, not in Gaza, not in Tehran, not in Doha. There is no immunity for terrorists. And yet, here in this council, some members chose to give Hamas legitimacy, even protection. Israel will not. We will act against the leaders of terror wherever they are hiding. Mr. President, we have heard today in this council allegations about a breach of the territorial sovereignty of Qatar. But one must ask, where were these concerns when sovereignty was violated by terror itself? On October 8, when Hezbollah launched rockets across Israel's border, when Houthis fired a ballistic missile at Ben Gurion airport, or just days ago, when a Houthi drone crashed into the arrivals hall of Rabon airport, injuring civilians. How can anyone hide behind allegations appealing to the principles of international law while giving legitimacy to those who openly glorify October 7th and continue to plot terror? Mr. President, this brings me to Qatar. Prime Minister Al-Thani, the time for Qatar to choose has come. For too long, Qatar has harbored terrorists, offering Hamas leaders sanctuary in luxury hotels while they orchestrate massacres and terror attacks. History will not be kind to accomplices. Either Qatar condemns Hamas, expels Hamas, and brings Hamas to justice, or Israel will. Mr. President, the world has faced moments like this before. Today, the world remembers the devastating terrorist attacks of September 11th. That tragic day, like October 7th for Israel, was a day of fire and blood. In the aftermath of 9/11, the countries that uphold freedom, equality, and democracy in this council stood shoulder to shoulder. 2 weeks later, this council adopted Resolution 1373. It said plainly, no state may harbor terrorists. No state may fund them. No state may give them safe haven. I urge you all to read this resolution. Any government that does so breaks this council binding obligations. That principle was clear then. It must be upheld today. And when bin Laden was eliminated in Pakistan, the question asked was not, why target a terrorist on foreign soil? No one asked that question. The question was, why was a terrorist given shelter at all? The same question must be asked today. There was no immunity for bin Laden, and there can be no immunity for Hamas. And in facing terror, history shows that members of this council have done the very same. From 2014 to 2022, France struck terrorists in Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. In 2014 and 2015, the United Kingdom carried out airstrikes in Iraq and Syria against ISIS. So I ask, if these actions were justified then, why is Israel singled out now? Why are claims concerning sovereignty invoked only against Israel and ignored when others act to defend themselves? Is Israeli blood worthless? The question to ask is not why Israel targets the mastermind of terror, but why they are sheltered abroad, while hostages starve in captivity and Gazans are left to suffer. Israel's fight is not only Israel's. It is a fight of all who believe in democracy against those who worship death and violence, light against darkness, civilization against barbarism, justice against terror. We will continue until the hostages are free, until our people are safe, and until terror can no longer find sanctuary in any corner of the world, because there is no, and there never will be, immunity for terrorists. Thank you, Mr. President.
I am obliged to take the floor to respond to some comments. The representative of Israel perhaps did not listen attentively to all council members and other speakers in today's debate. And in our view, it is unacceptable, indeed ludicrous, for an aggressor, an occupier, a serial violator of UN Charter and international law, that is Israel, to abuse this chamber and disrespect the sanctity of this council. And this is not the first time. and by pointing fingers on others, baseless assertions primarily aimed at masking its own illegal actions and violations of international law. President, but that's not at all surprising. It is an occupier that does not listen to anyone, that does not pay heed to any advice, even from its friends, if there are any left, that refutes, and not just refutes, it threatens members of the international community, international media, international human rights and humanitarian organizations, doesn't listen to the ICJ or the ICC, and threatens the UN and its senior officials. And it does that with impunity, shielded by its apologists who time and again acquiesce in its illegal actions and defiance of the international community. And like all occupiers, despite being the aggressor, it feigns and plays the victim. But today it is totally exposed. President, this Council has spent decades discussing the situation in the Middle East and the Palestinian question. Meeting after meeting, we devote hours to this agenda. It is not because of anyone else. It is because of Israel that refuses to vacate its illegal occupation and that blatantly violates the resolutions of this Council. It's because of that we have these discussions. Israel also chose to refer to an unrelated incident and make misleading remarks regarding Pakistan in an effort to justify its own illegal actions and violations of international law. Pakistan's position on that incident has been clearly stated and is publicly available. The international community is well aware of Pakistan's frontline role and sacrifices in the international community's fight against terrorism. The entire world, including our partners, acknowledge that Al-Qaeda was largely decimated due to Pakistan's counterterrorism efforts. And we remain committed in this global, collective endeavor. We cannot accept insinuations from an irresponsible rogue state that is, in fact, the perpetrator of worst kind of state terrorism that we are witnessing in Gaza and, in fact, in the occupied Palestinian territories for decades. And we reject any false analogy, as has also been done by Qatar. For whatever way it interprets the statements in this Council, the occupying power must go back and read carefully the statement issued by the Security Council today. And let me read it out loud here. A statement that normally should have been stronger, but nevertheless it has been unanimously adopted by the Council. The members of the Security Council expressed their condemnation of the recent strikes in Doha, the territory of a key mediator, on 9 September. They expressed deep regret at the loss of civilian life. Council members underscored the importance of de-escalation and expressed their solidarity with Qatar. They underlined their support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar in line with the principles of the UN Charter. Council members recalled their support for the vital role that Qatar continues to play in mediation efforts in the region and alongside Egypt and the United States. Council members underscored that releasing the hostages, including those killed by Hamas, and ending the war and suffering in Gaza must remain our priority. In this regard, they reiterated the importance of the ongoing diplomatic efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, and called for the parties to seize the opportunity for peace. That is why we are here this afternoon in this council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. The representative of Israel has asked the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, if the distinguished colleague from Pakistan wanted to read the statement, he could have done it at the beginning of the session. But I want to refer to your words. You know, maybe you got offended from the word of my speech, and I apologize for that. But I make sure that in my speech I stick to the facts. And the fact is that Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, and no one condemned the US. And when other countries in this council attack terrorists, no one condemns them. And that is the issue of double standards. When you apply different standards on Israel, then the standard you apply on yourselves, that is the problem of this institution. So yes, you cannot change the fact that 9/11 happened, and today we mark this day. You cannot change the fact that Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan and he was killed on your territory. But I would ask you, when you criticize us, and I'm sure it will continue in the future, think about the issue of double standards, which standards you apply to your country and which standards you apply to Israel. Thank you, Mr. President.
The floor to United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, we have heard a lot about international law from the world's worst violators of international law. It's time to challenge the perpetrators. And so we ask Qatar, if you don't want targeted bombings against terrorists in your capital, why do you harbor terrorists in your capital? Terrorists who are still holding hostages, torturing them, and rejecting peace deals. Why did you host Hania, Mashal, and Al-Khaya in luxury hotels from where they planned their terror? Why did you back Hamas's Gaza coup in 2007? Why have you funneled billions since then, fueling their terror machine, empowering their 5 wars against Israel? Why did you blame Israel for October 7th, absolving Hamas of massacring 1,200 Israelis, Americans, and others? Why is your state-owned Al Jazeera serving as the terror group's non-stop propaganda arm? Why do you act as a mediator by day and a terror sponsor by night? Mr. President, the record shows Qatar is a state sponsor of terror. The Gulf states said so in 2017 when they suspended ties with Qatar. Now, yesterday, Antonio Guterres and French President Macron condemned Israel. But when the U.S. killed bin Laden in Pakistan, the UN chief at the time celebrated that, quote, justice has been done to such a mastermind of international terrorism. France called it a victory for all democracies. We ask both. How is this different? Now, when Israel captured the Nazi Adolf Eichmann, rescued the hostages at Entebbe, and destroyed Saddam's nuclear reactor, the UN condemned Israel. Each time...
Sorry, I have a point of order. Sorry, the delegation of Pakistan. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. While we believe in constructive engagement with the civil society organizations and value their inputs, we urge you to ensure that no speaker violates the principles and purposes of the UN Charter and the territorial integrity of sovereign member states. We reject casting unfounded accusations and allegations. This August forum should not be allowed to be misused, especially by those who doctor videos, who doctor narratives, and now doctor facts. I thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, I would like to invite all of us to respect the tone that is commensurate with the important responsibility of this Council. I also remind everybody that points of order are on procedural issues, not on substantive issues. I give the floor back to United Nations Watch for 4 seconds.
And Pakistan is another state sponsor of terror, so we thank their contribution.
Je donne la parole à Action.
Thank you. I give the floor to Action for Development.
Mr. President, illegal occupation and denial of self-determination breed relentless human rights violations. Despite UNSC resolutions and global calls, India persists in illegal occupation and demographic engineering in IIOJK. We urge OHCHR to issue a third report. Adding to its record of brazenly flouting international law, India has sought to weaponize water and boasted of endangering 240 million lives.
We are compelled, once again, to address provocations from a country whose own leadership recently likened it to a dump truck. Perhaps an inadvertently apt metaphor for a state that continues to deposit recycled falsehoods and stale propaganda before this distinguished council. Pakistan's systematic abuse of this forum, coupled with its routine manipulation of the OIC as its mouthpiece, has become a familiar pattern. Its pathological fixation on India appears to provide it with existential validation. Yet, we must respond, lest we forget. Lest we forget the carnage of Pahalgam, where Pakistan-sponsored terrorists turned a meadow of joy into a killing field in April this year. Lest we forget 9/11, as the world marks its anniversary tomorrow, even as we witness today the hypocrisy of those who sheltered its mastermind and glorified him as a martyr. Lest we forget Pulwama, Uri, Pathankot, Mumbai. The list is endless, Mr. President. Yet, Pakistan demonstrates the audacity to take the floor today, feigning moral outrage while continuing to finance and shelter the very networks that threaten global security. The international community recognizes this charade for what it is. The world will not forget. India will not forget. Our measured and proportionate response to the Pahalgam attack made that sufficiently clear. We need no lessons from a terror sponsor, no sermons from a persecutor of minorities, no advice from a state that has squandered its own credibility. Mr. President, India will continue to protect its citizens with unwavering resolve. We will defend our sovereignty without compromise. And we will continue to expose time and again the elaborate deception of a failed state whose survival depends upon trafficking in terror and tragedy.